Appreciate that. Thank you all very much. Pleasure to join you. Pleasure to be back at National Religious Broadcasters Convention. This isn't my first rodeo here. I've been here before in various capacities that I've been in the past. As people usually, when they greet me anymore, they say, gosh, what do we call you? I mean, you've been senator, governor, ambassador, and I tell them my favorite title is grandpa. I've got 3 grandchildren, expecting 2 more, and it's just the best thing ever. And any of you that don't have grandchildren, when you get there, you're going to love it. They're fantastic. Although, because I've been around public life for a while, I do get comments like there was this waiter at the UN. I was up there about a month and a half ago, and the waiter afterwards wanted to meet me. And he was waiting around, and the lady said, could you meet this guy? And I said, sure, sure. And I shook his hand. He said, oh, my goodness, I'm just so happy. I've never met a vintage American politician before. So I said, I guess vintage is in, I hope. That's the case. This is great to be back with you, and it's great to serve this administration in this role. This is an administration committed to action. As you've seen in Jerusalem, with the movement of the embassy that took place there, and then a recent statement as well by the Trump administration. We also saw action with Pastor Andrew Brunson. That you may remember that case that the president advocated with President Erdogan in Turkey multiple times, let him go, let him go. These are specious charges. The Turkish government didn't let him go, so the president put on sanctions on steel and aluminum coming from Turkey into the United States. It tanked the Turkish currency to a record low, made Andrew Brunson the most expensive political prisoner in the world, and now he's walking free off of action by this administration. Then just this morning, Secretary Pompeo announced further action on the pro-life front. Secretary Pompeo announced a doubling down on the Mexico City policy and the Sojourner Amendment prohibiting U.S. foreign aid from supporting or funding abortions overseas. This action does shut a back door used to thwart President Trump's pro-life agenda. So this administration is pro-life, and they're not afraid to say it, defend it, or act on it. And the Secretary just announced that this morning, and his office wanted to make sure that I brought that and told you about it here today. Every day I get to work on behalf of the persecuted around the world, and it's a great privilege to do that, and America is in a unique spot to advocate for the persecuted around the world. It's this liberty for religious freedom that drove our pilgrim ancestors to cross the Atlantic, headed for the shores of the New World, seeking a land where they could worship freely. And we do it now, and we advocate for that around the world, and we need to. I met just yesterday with an Iranian pastor who is now in the United States, telling me about the persecution that he experienced in Iran. And in one particularly chilling episode where he's being beaten on by his persecutors, being threatened, his persecutor is sitting there across the table from him and rolling a bullet in his fingers and saying, every Christian needs one of these. That's what he said to intimidate him. But he didn't fold. He kept going. He's here leading the church now in the Los Angeles area, and we're reaching out to him and to others to hear their stories, to hear and work with their networks, to work with individuals that are in prison. But religious freedom and religious liberty isn't just an American right. It is a fundamental human right for all people everywhere. It flows from the inherent dignity of a human individual. It's because we're created in the image of God that we inherently have this freedom. It is a God-given right that no government has the right to interfere with. To have faith, to not have faith, to convert and pick a different course of action according to your conscience, these are a person's rights. In all of this, the government's role is pretty simple. It's to protect the right, not to pick a winner or loser, not to pick a particular faith or favor another. The government's role is to protect and defend the right to religious freedom, period. And the United States is pursuing this aggressively. Religious freedom is a top foreign policy priority for this administration. We believe this is a universal and natural right. Now, when I reflect on my own faith in this space, I think of how God gave man the free will to choose to believe or not. That freedom is a beautiful and a sacred right. If God has given man this freedom, how much more should governments leave it to their citizens, this freedom to do with their own soul as they choose? And that's why I'm thrilled that you've dedicated this session to this topic of religious freedom. Despite broad-based agreement that people should not suffer for their faith, and despite most of the world's countries signing on with the UN Declaration of Human Rights, more than 80% of the world's population lives in a religiously restricted atmosphere. As I travel the world, I'm struck with stories of men and women who suffer restrictions, discrimination, and persecution, yet their souls are beautiful, crafted through pain. They remain thankful. I saw one just this afternoon in Pastor Tien, a Vietnamese pastor who spent 7 years in jail in Vietnam, and yet his soul continues to shine, and he's thankful, and he advocates. It is their voices that spur me on in our office, on in our work, and I believe it is their voices that will help turn the tide of religious persecution around the world. Now, last year, we conducted the first ever ministerial on religious freedom, where we invited foreign ministers from around the world to come to Washington, D.C. to talk about religious freedom. We had hundreds of civil society and advocacy groups and many religious leaders there discussing how to further this human right, this basic human right of religious freedom. Throughout the gathering, we gave the platform to 17 people who had been persecuted for their faith. It was their harrowing stories of struggle and courage that revealed the heart of religious freedom. And let me tell you just a couple of them. Ji Hwan Ah escaped from North Korea 3 times, only to be returned again and again. For owning a small pocket Bible, she was tortured and forced to renounce her faith. North Korea killed her first child, completing a forced abortion on her without anesthesia. On her 4th escape from North Korea, she found freedom and spoke at last year's ministerial. ISIS fighters invaded Yazidi Nadia Murad's village in 2014. They killed 600 Yazidi men, including her brothers and stepbrothers, and they took the young women as sex slaves. Nadia was raped, beaten, and tortured. She survived and escaped through an unlocked door. Nadia has become a leading advocate for her faith and ethnic community of Yazidis, telling her story to advocate for survivors of human trafficking and religious persecution. She has now been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I spoke myself with, and I know Nadia, and I spoke with other Yazidi women, one of which told me a story about she had a 15-year-old mentally challenged child in her home that the ISIS fighters beat her arms until she let go of this young man, and she doesn't know yet where he is today. And then there's the story of Jacqueline Brunson, daughter of Pastor Andrew Brunson, who, as I mentioned, was held on specious charges in Turkey. Together with her missionary parents, Jacqueline had lived in Turkey, and eventually she returned to the United States, met a man, and fell in love. She spoke at the ministerial powerfully about how they had married at the courthouse, waiting in faith for the day when her father would come home and be able to walk her down the aisle. The morning following her remarks at the ministerial, the Turkish government released her father from prison to house arrest, and eventually, after bold action by this administration, Pastor Brunson was freed. Today, he's returned to America and has walked his daughter down the aisle. It's the stories of survivors, their voices of strength and sorrow and courage and loss that moves hearts and minds. To hear their experiences is to know the desire for change. Statistics may be striking, but stories are gripping, arresting our imagination and engaging our empathy. But we need more storytellers. If we hope to push back the persecution, we must not only engage policymakers and governments, but we must also enlist religious leaders and civic society groups, and most of all, just ordinary citizens. We need a grassroots uprising saying no more to religious persecution. No more. We need people in Topeka and Columbus and Mesa and Tampa talking with their pastors, congressmen, and neighbors. And how will they know? How will they hear the stories of people like Nadia and Jacqueline? That's why we need you, the National Association of Religious Broadcasters. It's through the reporting and storytelling that you do of organizations like yours that can serve as catalysts for advocacy. One of the initiatives of my office that I have great hope for is a partnership with NRB. Once a month, NRB hosts a teleconference allowing me to share about troubled regions around the world, about growing persecution, and about stories of men and women of faith who have overcome what their persecutors have given them. I invite you to join these calls. Be among the first to know about rising threats. Ask questions about the ever-shifting landscape of religious freedom, and hear the stories of men and women of resilience, of courage, and of hope. As we look around the globe today for emerging threats to religious freedom, there are unfortunately a host of contenders. From Iran and North Korea, Pakistan, India, Nigeria, Syria, and many, many others. But perhaps the most egregious example is the systematic persecution of all religions by the Chinese Communist Party and the government of China. The Chinese Communist Party does not trust its own people to allow them to choose their own path for their souls. There are over 1 billion souls at stake. It seems the Chinese government is at war with faith, but it is a war they will not win. In China today, churches are being destroyed, pastors arrested, and by the way, say prayers for your pastors and spiritual leaders. They are the first ones that get attacked on religious persecution cases. In China, no longer can Muslims name their children Muhammad. It's illegal. No longer can Tibetan Buddhists choose and venerate their own religious leaders as they have for more than 1,000 years. In the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, Western China, Chinese government authorities have arbitrarily detained members of Muslim minority groups in internment camps for their cultural and religious practices, for being Muslims. Since April of 2017, the Chinese government authorities have detained more than 1 million Uyghurs, ethnic Kazakhs and Kyrgyz, and members of other Muslim ethnic minority groups in internment camps. 1 million, over that. Family members often do not know the whereabouts of their loved ones or even whether they're still alive or not. We're deeply concerned and consider this oppression a deliberate attempt by Beijing to redefine and control members of these Muslim minority groups and their identity, their culture, and faith. Today, as I speak here, Pastor John Sao is in a prison in China, convicted for 7 years. His crime was crossing the border with Burma to help establish schools and orphanages for needy children. His wife is an American citizen. On our most recent call with NRB reporters, I discussed my recent travels to Hong Kong and Taiwan to highlight the systematic persecution of people of faith. We will continue raising the case of religious believers in China and other places around the world as we fight to advance religious freedom. Join this conference call. I invite you to our second ministerial we're going to do on advancing religious freedom, July 16th to 18th in Washington, D.C. Here are the stories of survivors. We are dedicated to this fight, and we invite you to join us. Instead of more persecution, pray for a future not of discrimination or restrictions, but of more freedom. We want more freedom. We believe we will see the gates of international religious freedom flying open around the world. Someday we will see the Iron Curtain of religious freedom coming down. That's our belief. We ask you for your prayers. As Vice President Pence said at the ministerial last year, the right to believe or not believe is the most fundamental of freedoms. When religious freedom is denied or destroyed, we know that other freedoms, freedom of speech, of press, of assembly, and even democratic institutions themselves are imperiled. That's why the United States of America stands for religious freedom yesterday, today, and always. We do this because it is right. But we also do this because religious freedom is in the interest of the peace and security of the world. So let's stand and fight for those like Pastor Wang Yi of the Early Rain Covenant Church in China, currently in prison. He said in a 2017 sermon, "In this world, how do we demonstrate that we are a group of people who trust in Jesus? It is through bodily submission, through bodily suffering, that we demonstrate the freedom of our souls." And he's in a Chinese prison today. Let's fight for him. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Hello, all. Wow. Well, let me just introduce myself real quick for those who don't know me in the audience. I'm Aaron Mercer. I'm Vice President of Government Relations with NRB. So we're so thankful you're here for the public policy session. And Ambassador, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Aaron.
Wow, that was a great challenge for us. And we really, really appreciate that and your insights. I need to give quick, we're at a media association here, so I need to give full disclosure. The ambassador is my former boss, so this is kind of cool that I get to sit down with him and talk about these issues with him on stage at NRB. There's I get to brag on you too a little bit. There's not a finer man for this post than Sam Brownback, and I'm so thankful that you're serving where you are right now. So praise the Lord for that. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Aaron. An honor to serve in it. Honor to serve.
Well, we have some time for some question and answer time here, and if you don't mind, I'd like to dig in a little bit more on your China trip. You went to Hong Kong, and I was amazed when I saw the speech you gave. You went to Hong Kong, and it's getting to be baseball season. You delivered some high heat to the host country, and wow. I mean, so what I think a lot of us know here too that we're obviously in the midst of a trade negotiation with China as well. What message should China take, but even the rest of the world take about how serious our nation is about religious liberty in the midst of all that?
I think they should take the message that this administration is willing to fight. This administration has taken on China on trade issues. It's something we should have done 10, 15 years ago as a government, but better now than never. But is also willing to engage on human rights issues, and particularly on religious freedom. And I think that the Chinese have to be called out on this. I mean, they are going after the Christians, the house church. They have gone after the Catholics. They have gone after Protestant Catholics, all groups there. They've gone after the Muslim Uyghurs. They've gone after Falun Gong. They've gone after the Tibetan Buddhists. Remember, this is an atheistic communist party. And they see all of these as somehow a threat. In the past, they've let some of it kind of grow and go forward, but not now. And about 2 years ago, there was a big thing that happened that most people didn't observe. They took the regulation of religion from the government and gave it to the Communist Party. So the Communist Party is the regulator of religion in China now, and it's become much harsher and much more direct today. And then you see these major pastors like Wang Yi that is in jail, Early Rain Covenant Church. There was a major evangelical church in Beijing, just shut them down and arrested people and continued to persecute.
Wow. Well, thank you for raising that challenge. You were in Hong Kong. Are there allies in Hong Kong and maybe even in mainland China on this issue that can help hopefully turn the Communist Party from the direction they're going?
Well, that's the thing that's so striking, actually, about it. You remember when Hong Kong was handed over by the British to China, the Chinese agreed for 50 years of 2 systems, 1 country. They agreed to allow Hong Kong to operate separately and you can have religious freedom there. I went to church on Sunday in Hong Kong, no problem, no security guards issues. Traffic was terrible, but outside of that, that was the major issue.
Was that before or after your speech?
Yeah, just most of the time. But my point in saying that was that what is China afraid of people having a Bible or having a faith? Hong Kong operates just fine, and they have religious freedom, but the Hong Kong people are concerned that what's taking place on the mainland is going to migrate their way, even though there was an agreement that this wouldn't happen for 50 years. But I would like to say to the Chinese government, open up and follow your model that you have in Hong Kong of a religious freedom taking place. This isn't a foreign concept to you. You can do this. And if they don't, I think we ought to hammer them and really push this. And plus, and finally on this, unfortunately, the United States is one of the few countries willing to stand up to China. We need more allies to stand up to them, particularly on these issues of human rights and religious persecution.
Amen. Yeah, that's worth clapping for. Well, Ambassador, afterwards you went to Taiwan, and you had a summit there, you mentioned. What sort of response did you get in Taiwan? Were there people from around the region who were there? What are some of the outcomes that came from that summit?
You know, they're excited, a lot of the advocates that came together there, that the United States is willing to stand up and to push this issue. Unfortunately, we don't have as many countries around the world pushing for religious freedom like the U.S. does. But they were just heartened and hopeful because we were standing up and pushing, and they're willing to join the fight. Remember, and I remember this story from Natan Sharansky, and some of you are old enough with me to remember the Soviet refuseniks and the Soviet Jewry movement and the evangelicals that came out of the fall of the Soviet Union. Remember, they were persecuted. The Soviet Union wouldn't let them out, and they became a cause célèbre. And people like Natan Sharansky, a Jewish man, that they wouldn't let immigrate to Israel. You can hear Natan tell the story about when he heard us starting to advocate for them, it gave them hope, and they heard about it in the prisons, and it really enlivened them that somebody does care and something can happen. And that's what happens when we will speak up, is people in villages all over the place that are huddled in little corners, afraid they're going to be heard, that they're praying. They start to hear that somebody's advocating, they're pushing for them. It gives them strength, it gives them hope. And we've got to fight for them. They deserve it.
That's a good word. Now, before we leave, I wanted to hit on a couple other areas of the world. But before we leave China, the China situation, you had mentioned in a few of your comments, you mentioned how China is using tech to persecute religious minorities, Christians and others. Can you talk about that a little more? There's a lot of tech people in the audience. Can you talk more about that?
This is truly scary to me, Aaron, what's taking place. I saw a report recently of nearly 400 million security cameras will be deployed in China by the end of next year. 400 million. And then he's got the facial recognition systems behind it to be able to recognize who's going into the church, who's going into the mosque, and then to be able to sort through that data. And now they have this social credit score system that they're saying is to make people better people, but can also be used to remove you from your apartment, keep you from your job, not allow your children in school. So they've got these systems that they're developing of security and apparatus and artificial intelligence to sort through the data to really focus on and persecute people of faith, to marginalize you in the society. They're doing this currently in Xinjiang to the Muslims. They post a number of these cameras in the churches. Right now, while I was in China, I read a story about you can get on a bus now by the facial recognition camera on the bus, and they'll charge your account.
Wow.
And you're going, oh my gosh. Now imagine how that could be used if an administration in that country is willing to persecute people of faith. What happens to you then? How do you even participate in this society? That's you being used today. And we're concerned as well that they're going to sell the system to other countries, then to be able to use this to put down populations that governments don't like.
Wow. Well, that is something for us to be keeping a close eye on, and we will for sure. Now, you had a summit in Taiwan, and I know you've had, out of the ministerial from last summer, there have been other summits that have spawned from that, regional summits. You were recently in the Middle East, and it sounds like there was a really good summit there, and there seems like there have been there's always troubles in the Middle East, but there seems like there's been some positive developments. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
You know, I was really encouraged. We did one of these in UAE in Abu Dhabi, and that one was specifically focused on textbooks. Unfortunately, in the Middle East and a number of countries, the government will allow material or put material in textbooks to denigrate a minority faith and say this faith is bad for these reasons in their textbooks. But UAE joined with us and a number of other countries in the region saying, no, this is a terrible idea for governments to do this, to teach at an early age your children to persecute people of another faith or to denigrate a different faith. And we had people there from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, some other countries that we've been pushing pretty hard about this. But it's great to have an ally in the region helping us with this. UAE recently hosted the first ever papal visit in the history of mankind to the Saudi Peninsula. It's never happened before. And so that they're opening up, and with them opening up, they've got this dynamic, blooming economy of lots of people of different faith. Again, I went to church in Abu Dhabi Sunday morning. Again, the only problem was traffic, and part of our point is if you want to grow your economy, you need religious freedom. If you want less terrorism and more security, you need religious freedom. It's protecting the minorities that moves you forward, not persecuting them.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I wanted to hit on another place too that we've been here. Actually, we don't hear about it as much in the news anymore, and we should. We heard a lot about Nigeria for many years, and Boko Haram and the tragedies there. They've just recently had an election, and sometimes on Capitol Hill, I hear about how the persecution of Christians is still happening there. But I haven't heard about it as much in the news. What do we need to be knowing about what's happening in Nigeria?
You need to be knowing there's a lot of deadly violence that's taking place in that country, and often there's a religious divide that's a key piece of that. And it continues to happen. It's in large numbers. It's in a number of places. You've got Boko Haram. You've got ISIS, West Africa. You've got a penetration of some ethnic groups it was a farmer-herder conflict, but the herders now, instead of showing up with sticks to herd their cattle, they're showing up with AK-47s and killing villagers. It is really something that I think we've got to put much more focus on, because it's the largest population country in Africa, and it's got major divisions there. We really, I think, need to focus a lot more on it, and these religious tinged conflicts that are happening all over the place.
Well, thank you, sir, for all that you do on that. And you mentioned the case of Pastor Andrew Brunson in your remarks. And I just want to take the opportunity here to say thank you for the work that you personally did on that, as well as President Trump, Vice President Pence, Secretary Pompeo, and I know others. But you were there. You went there, and you were there during his trials, and you made sure that the Turkish government knew that he needed to be freed. So thank you for that. And what do you think that, what sort of message, do you think other countries are getting the message that they need to be careful about putting prisoners of conscience away like that?
I think they are, but Aaron, President Trump got this done. I was pushing, but he just got fed up, said, I'm going to slap these tariffs on, tank the economy, and waits for them to do the right thing. And they eventually did. But no other president has ever put tariffs and sanctions on a fellow NATO ally. And this president did it. And he stood up.
Let's clap, yeah.
And he fought. So I'm impressed. I'm impressed. And Andrew Brunson, I've gotten to know since then, is a beautiful soul, that 2 years in prison was very harsh, and it really caused his soul to shine. He is a beautiful man. If you ever get a chance to go somewhere and hear him speak, as he's traveling around a lot, do it. And his wife is a beautiful soul as well for standing up for him as she did. And many of you, I think people around the world were praying for him and praying for the country of Turkey at the same time.
I know we at NRB certainly were, and so thank you. Well, let me just wrap up with this and ask you this, big picture question. What can we be doing to be? You mentioned the conference call that NRB is working on, and with you, and thank you so much for being part of that. What can we be doing as Christian communicators, as broadcasters, podcasters, and whatnot? How can we be helping the cause that you're working on? And also, how can we be praying for you and your staff as you're in the middle of this day in and day out?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. One of the things you can do is in your communities, there are so many people from other countries all around the United States, and many of them know stories about what's happening in their home country they're from. I just came from a Vietnamese American session where we were talking with them about different religious groups that are persecuted, and it wasn't 5 miles away from here. Talked with an Iranian diaspora group earlier today in Los Angeles. Most communities have diaspora there, and you can ask them what's taking place, what can we find out about, and what can we advocate for. There's a diocese in Arizona that's helping to rebuild some of the houses in northern Iraq that were destroyed, that were a Catholic community there that was destroyed by ISIS. You can help directly in places like that and build those connections back and forth and let people know. It's by knowing that people then will start to advocate. And this is the place that it has to happen first and the most. We care about it. We'll fight for it. But we does need that individual people-to-people and soul contact. And then I think if you can pray for us to have wisdom and discernment of the battles to get into, there are lots of places, and favor with God and man. To be able to push these on forward, because this really is a season this needs to happen. And this is an administration that can push it in this season. So I grew up on a farm, and you make hay while the sun's out. The sun's out, folks. This is the time really to push these issues, and we hope you'll do it.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can we thank the Ambassador for being here? Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being with us today. We're going to be praying for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.